So I was tasked with coming up with how I would do a 32 team NHL if I started from scratch. So, not with team names, not with histories, but if you're starting from scratch, you have to start your own league, 32 cities. And I was told you can make it anywhere in the world, but that's so vast. And so many cities would get cut out. And I had to look at it and I had to think about it because I have thought about this for decades. So it's not like I have to look at a map. It's not like I have to, sit around and figure, okay, geographically, where are these cities? And for fans of my channel for long enough, you know that I had a 40 team league I wrote myself and had the whole thing. And I had 40 cities figured out. And that was when the NHL had expanded to 30. But I had that league before the NHL expanded to 30. And sometimes I get it right and sometimes I don't. So I couldn't go into this and say, well, let's look at where hockey's succeeded. So there are certain organizations that are not in this league, not because I don't think they're good cities now, but because if I was starting from scratch, I don't know that I'd look at that city and say, okay, we'll go there. So again, if you're a fan, I'm going to say right now, if you're a fan in Arizona, fan in Carolina, I didn't make these decisions based on, well, that's not somewhere that they should have hockey and we should move them. I made it based on if I was building my own league from the ground up, where would I look in terms of putting franchises in order? Number one, and these are west and east. It'll be 16 on each side. I'm not going to do divisions because it just gets to be too much of a pain if I'm going to do divisions of 8. I'm not even going to try. Number one in the east is Toronto. Toronto is the hub for hockey. It's where most hockey fans are, and absolutely you have to have a team in Toronto to start. You're going to notice I start with East Coast. East Coast where you've got majority of, you got your cold locations, you've got your population centers, you've got a lot of hockey fans. Number two, the city of New York. The other thing I didn't do with this was add second teams in cities, or else you could do 2 teams in the city of New York and 2 teams in the city of Toronto. New York and Brooklyn are a thing, and it can work. 3, also, East Coast. Montreal. Montreal, the, some would argue, birthplace of hockey. You'd have to have Montreal in there, obviously. And they'd obviously be early. Toronto, New York, Montreal, my first 3 teams. The first team that qualifies as a Western team comes in next. Apologies for my reach. Chicago. The Blackhawks come in next. The Blackhawks are... that would be probably the team name. You got to think, original owner. No. But Chicago is a city that, with a large population and a lot of people who follow hockey, it's a cold city. You think of it as a hockey city. Chicago absolutely belongs in there. Number 5, we're going back to Canada. If you look at the early history of hockey, Ottawa was in there. And Ottawa lost their team at one point. The Senators moved to St. Louis, and then that St. Louis team folded, and they were bad at that point. But Ottawa absolutely is a hockey city. Truth. Ottawa is a hockey city. Should have been in the NHL the whole way through. The NHL righted it wrong in the early 90s when they brought them in as an expansion team, and I would have them in my league early. Also because, remember, if I'm building my league, I'm going, well, this is an eastern city. This will work for travel with these teams. And Chicago, technically, though it's a Western Conference team in the end, they're not that far out. There's a reason the original 6 teams were the ones they were. Speaking of which, number 5 for the East, number 6 overall, Boston. Much the same reason as New York. You've got a natural geographical rivalry as well. Large population, cold weather, hockey fans, perfect place to put a team. So they'd be number 6. Number 7, now we're looking out west. Kind of. Minneapolis. Or St. Paul, it doesn't matter. And technically, if you're talking about areas that could support two teams, I do think Minneapolis and St. Paul could both have teams and both support them. But I'm not doing that. Not on this board. Not today. Minneapolis would be next. It is the state of hockey. Hockey is beloved in Minneapolis. Yes, I realize there's an original 6 city that I snubbed by putting Minneapolis in there as early as I did and by putting Ottawa in there. As I said, Ottawa was in the NHL early as well. Minneapolis is a natural spot to have hockey. It's the reason why when the North Stars moved out, the NHL righted it by putting in the Minnesota Wild within a decade. The NHL knew that was a problem. Number 8. Yeah, they're in the East. I wasn't sure if I ended up putting them in the East or not. There you go. There's Detroit. I would be hesitant to have Detroit too early. There's economic issues in Detroit. There are reasons why Detroit struggles in terms of its ticket sales. The city is kind of a mess in terms of unemployment and the auto industry, but it's a big city, East Coast, easy travel for these organizations, and this is Midwest. This is not West Coast yet. I haven't gone West Coast, and that's for a reason. I'm not going West Coast until I've got a plan, right? Number 9. Number 7, Eastern team. City's name that's hard to get into that small space, Philadelphia. And because I'm bringing in Philadelphia at number 10, I'm bringing in Pittsburgh. You had to bring them in together. Originally, you'd bring them in together here. If this was a 10-team league, obviously you'd have 2 divisions of 5. You'd split it somehow, but you have 2 divisions of 5, playoffs and all that stuff. You could have the top 6 make the playoffs, top 2 get a bye into the finals, that kind of, or semifinals, that kind of stuff. But those are the first 10. Now, next 10, I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to hit the West Coast. It's time. And if I'm going to hit the West Coast, the first place I'm going is Los Angeles. I'm going to put a team in LA and have a Western Conference, Minnesota, Chicago, LA. That's kind of brutal. So, as well as LA, I'm going to look back to Canada and go to Vancouver. Vancouver's, again, West Coast travel buddy for LA. Going to be some brutal travel for these teams if that's how you have it. 4 and 8, so 2 of these teams would play in the West. I would speculate that if 2 of these teams had to play in a Western Conference, you probably have Detroit and either Philly or Pittsburgh. Flip a coin on that one, which would take away your Pennsylvania rivalry, of course, but you'd kind of have to do that for a bit if you're up to 12 teams, but Vancouver would be team number 12. Number 13, and we're still in the West, because I got to balance this out, right? St. Louis. You're looking at Midwest. You're looking at Minneapolis, you're looking at Chicago, and you have to add in St. Louis. St. Louis absolutely gets in there. They'd be 13th on that list. And then to really even things out, and again, there's a large Canadian feel to this, and that's going to be a routine. I would say, you know what, the state or the province of Alberta, I'm going to add teams. I'm going to add both at the same time. You can't add one and not the other. So it's Calgary. It's Edmonton. They're both added. They're both in there. So we're up to 15. We've got 7 and 8. So now you've got a full-fledged Western Conference. You've got a full-fledged Eastern Conference. Things look good. At 16, because I don't like balance, I'm going to go to Buffalo. Why Buffalo? Buffalo's not a major city, but it's still the state of New York. Covers a part of New York that I'm not covering with just the New York team, and it's going to get fans that Boston's not going to get, and it's a nice spot for a team. It's a cold city. They're known for supporting football. They'll support hockey. Sure they will. Look at them with the World Juniors. They support hockey. Now, we're staying in the East Coast for this next team because, of course, we are. Use my hat. Okay. Quebec City. So here's where things start to change. So for people who are like, oh yeah, okay, so he's just adding all the NHL cities. Quebec City comes in as a natural rival for Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto. You got 4 Canadian cities on that East Coast now. Quebec City, natural rival to Montreal. History of supporting hockey in that area. It gives access to the games for people in the state, in the province of Quebec. I can want to say state. In the province of Quebec who may not have been going to Montreal games. And it's such a natural rivalry between Montreal, Toronto, Quebec, and Ottawa. That just those four cities, I think it works, and I'd put that in there. Out west, I'm staying in Canada. Winnipeg. So now you've got Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg. All on the same side of the ledger, obviously. All playing in the West. I've now got 4 teams in the Midwestern U.S., or 3 teams in the Midwestern U.S., 1 on the West Coast. I've got 4 Canadian teams, 1 on the West Coast, 2 on the Prairies. No, 3 on the Prairies, 2 on the Western Prairies, 1 on the Eastern Prairie. So that's solid. We're up to 18 cities. And again, I haven't really deviated from the NHL yet, although this means 1 city's out. Next up, Washington. There's a large tourist industry in Washington. Population in Washington's decent. Surrounding population's decent. And honestly, you've got one nation's capital. Let's throw in the other. Have them up against each other. So we got 19 teams now. I got 11 in the East. I got 8 in the West. It's an imbalance. It's going to get fixed. There's going to be 16 on each side of the ledger. And at this point, things are going to start to change. I do bring in Denver next. So Denver comes in as the 9th Western team. Big city. Colorado supports hockey. It's a natural place to put it. Sure. Notice I say Denver, not Colorado, because I'm looking at the city, not just what organization is working in the NHL. Denver makes sense. Colorado makes sense. Next up, at 21, Seattle. So everybody's kind of making a big deal about Seattle as the next expansion location for the NHL, and it looks like a certainty. Seattle was in the NHL before, of course, with the Seattle Metropolitans, or not in the NHL. They were in they won the Stanley Cup. They were in the Pacific Hockey League. The Pacific Coast Hockey League also had the Vancouver Millionaires. And they didn't survive as a major league the way that the NHL did later on. But Seattle supports hockey, has supported hockey for a long time. The Seattle Thunderbirds are supported. And if I was starting a professional league, I would absolutely have Seattle in it. There's no reason not to. Next up, we're going east again. And I'm going to Hamilton. Why Hamilton? Well, I've got all these Canadian teams and all these American teams, and they're all in the upper northeast coast of the country, of the States, and the eastern side of Canada. Hamilton fits right in. Now, I might have to throw Toronto some money for the fact that Hamilton's coming in. I might have to do some deals with Buffalo in order to make sure that they don't feel like they're being threatened. But I put a team in Hamilton. Hamilton will support hockey. Canada will support hockey. Makes perfect sense to put a team there. You have the population center. You could argue that Kitchener would also work, just based on the amount of population of fans who could go to those games and would go to those games. Ticket prices may have to be a little lower, probably, maybe, at certain points in time. But you're going to draw. You're going to draw fans in Hamilton. But next up is out west. And I'm going to put a city or a team where it failed before. I'm going to put it in Oakland. I'm not going to start with San Jose. Sometimes I wonder if the San Jose Sharks got into the NHL because they had the Oakland Seals before and they failed and they didn't want to go back to Oakland. There's some feeling I have about maybe that's why. San Jose Sharks have been a big hit. Big Bay Area hit. I think a team in Oakland would work. And I think a big part of it with the Golden Seals, look, they were a bad team. Teams that move around are usually pretty bad teams. And it's easy to understand why fans don't turn out in droves to watch their favorite team lose a bunch. So Oakland comes in. Now you've got 11 in the West Coast, or 11 in the Western Conference, 12 in the Eastern Conference. Next up, I'm going to go south. So I've stayed out of the south, right? I've got everything all scrunched up north. Out west, I've gone somewhat south. I've got a couple of California teams. I've avoided the south for the most part. But I have to look now, and I have to say, all right, if I'm going to fill 32 teams out here, I should give southern cities a look. At least a look. Where's it going to work? In the event that I've got this league, I do think the city of Nashville would set up or set themselves up to get in. If there's no NHL, I think Nashville comes into the league. Notice I've got them in the league as the 24th team rather than the 26th, which is what it was in the real NHL. Notice I don't have Hartford. Hartford's not in there. Hartford doesn't have the capability right now because they still don't have that NHL-sized arena to give me the offer Nashville does. I'm looking at the size, the scope. I'm looking at the fans I can bring in. Okay. So I've built my entire base on cities that will have natural hockey fans in them, that will have a hockey following there. And now I'm getting into the markets where it's not quite there, but it can be there with the right amount of effort and work. So for me, Nashville would come in at 24. And it gets trickier from here too, because again, when I'm doing this list, I'm thinking, all right, this would work. I keep thinking in my head, you know, that there are fans of teams that exist right now that aren't going to be happy. Now, I would put these teams in at the same time. I said I'm going south. I'd put in Dallas and Houston at the same time. And if you think about it, so this is, you know, gradual. This isn't all at once. If you're going to put in Dallas and Houston at the same time, they have the same expansion draft. They have a direct competition in terms of who they're picking. Just think about it, the entry draft. They're picking one after the other. The fight that you'd have between these two teams could potentially be epic. Now, if Houston gets into the NHL, the battles between those two cities will be epic anyways. And I do think Houston, with the arena and with the owner that wants a team there, I do think Houston gets a team. I don't know which one, because Gary Bettman and the owners are bound and determined to lose money in certain cities rather than admit it won't work. This league that I'm trying to build, I'm trying to make sure that all 32 teams can make a profit. That's my prime goal here. Where can I make a profit, have fans, built-in hockey fans, and build up rivalries that are going to be amazing? Think about Hamilton-Toronto and what that could mean. Toronto-Quebec. Quebec-Hamilton. Just this feeling. And then as well, you know, I'm building Oakland and LA. I'm building Dallas and Houston. So I'm not just looking at this from a Canadian perspective. I'm looking at this from a hockey perspective, an overall perspective. So if I've acknowledged I want teams in the South and the West, I want them in the East too. So I'm going to look to two cities. And you put a team in Florida, because it's a really large area of the country with a lot of people. But you also, and this is where people are going to say, what? Seriously? Yeah, you go to Atlanta. Look, I know the Atlanta Flames didn't work out particularly well there. I realized that the Atlanta Thrashers moved out because ownership was incompetent. I would still put a team in Atlanta. I still think hockey in Atlanta can work, because it's worked before. It wasn't that nobody went there. It was ownership. So with the right owner and the right marketing, a team in Atlanta works like a team in Tampa works. The Tampa Bay Lightning in the current NHL have been a success story. They've had trouble drawing at times. They've had to paper seats with free tickets or discounted tickets in the past. But I really think Tampa and Atlanta can both be moneymakers. And that does make me crazy. I'm well aware of that. Now, next up, where did I put them? Did I put them in the West or the East? I put them in the East. And this, it really doesn't matter. It's one city or the other. So, Columbus or Cleveland. I want a team in Ohio. It's going to be Columbus or Cleveland. natural rivalry with Washington and some of these teams in this area, I would put a team in Ohio. I honestly would probably lean towards Cleveland over Columbus, only because Cleveland has the Browns, Cleveland has the Cavaliers, and the idea is that they're already a sports city. But the reason the NHL went to Columbus is because Columbus was the biggest city in the U.S., the biggest market, that didn't have a professional sports franchise. Now, it's a college town. They have trouble drawing. I get it. That's why I have Cleveland on here, too, with the idea that I could see Cleveland being the city I'd go to instead of Columbus, but I can't really argue in favor of Cleveland over Columbus. And that's an argument for another time. Because there's other arguments that are going to come. So we're down to 3 cities left, right? I've got a team in Seattle. I've got a team in Vancouver. Why don't we go where we know they also support junior hockey? Portland. Portland, Oregon would support. I really believe Portland, Oregon would support the NHL. I do. I think that it is a market that it could work. And I understand there's going to be fans of other cities. There's going to be people who watch this who say that there's other cities that belong in there, and that's fine. I get it. You guys can, in the comment section below, let me know which cities that you think should be in here that I don't have in here. But again, the question was asked was, if you were designing a league from the ground up, 32 teams, anywhere in the world, where would you put teams? I'm restricting myself to North America, and these are the 32 that I think personally I would put teams in. So Portland would be in there, and then last in the East would be some sort of, and I'm putting New Jersey up here, but it would be another New York, New Jersey area team, just based on population. You have so many people, cold locations, natural in order to foster interest in hockey, a population that should be receptive to hockey considering how many other hockey teams there are in that geographical region. And it should work. A team in New Jersey, by all intents and purposes, should absolutely work. So where do I put Team 32? It's got to be in the West, right? Well, and again, I understand the NHL was here before and it didn't work. Kansas City. Kansas City sports is a sports city. Kansas City Chiefs, Kansas City Royals, the Scouts. Scouts were a terrible team. I think sometimes when I look at what the NHL's doing now in terms of its expansion and where it's going, I think maybe there's a perception that we failed in X location before, we can't go back there. Maybe that's why they want to go to Seattle and Houston, and a city like Kansas City doesn't get a lot of attention, if any. I think if Kansas City had an owner, they have an NHL-sized arena. I think if they had an owner, I think they'd have a hard time attracting attention from the NHL. So that would be my 32-team league if I was designing the NHL from the ground up. If it was my league from the ground up. Notice there's no team names up here. Those are just the cities. So let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. And I'm well aware there are cities that I missed. You know, there's Carolina that's not on here. There's Vegas isn't on here. Arizona isn't on here. Florida isn't on here. And so on and so forth. And the Islanders. In fact, one sec. All right. Yeah, Islanders, San Jose, and Anaheim as well. Carolina, southern location, not sure about the stability long term. Vegas, complete unknown before this year, right? And there's still fans saying, oh, it's not going to last. Arizona, desert. I wouldn't be putting teams in the desert. I understand what the NHL is trying to do, and I admire them for it. I'm not sure I'd do the same thing. Miami, Florida. If I got a team in Tampa, I might leave it at 1 in Florida. I don't really know that I would have the Florida Panthers in the league. The Islanders, it's Nassau, it's Long Island, I've got New Jersey, I've got the New York franchise. I don't know that I would necessarily put a team in Nassau, which is where they ended up the first time. San Jose, well, I've got Oakland. Anaheim, I've got Oakland and LA. I feel that I'm covered in California. So again, this is just my vision. Let me know yours in the comment section below. It's a fun thing to think about, and yet I admit I've kind of put this off for a while because I just know this is a dicey topic. But since we're looking at expansion, we're looking at who's going to go where and who's going to get what, this would be my personal vision of how the NHL would work if I was in charge. I think it would be I think every organization could make money. I think it goes to hockey's strengths. I admit there's not a lot of risk here in terms of going somewhere that's non-traditional. I admire Vegas for what they are. I admire the NHL for going there and for having the courage to do it. Personally, that's how I would have done it. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And if your team's not up here, your city's not up here, again, it's nothing personal. It's just between population and hockey interest, where would I be most likely to go? So thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.